Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Valle. I'm an immigration attorney and team lead here in our Cerritos, California office. And I'm going to be speaking briefly about the R1 visa that's available for religious workers. There are certain requirements that need to be met in order to qualify for this visa. First of all, the petitioner has to be a U.S. religious organization. They have to be classified as a nonprofit tax-exempt organization by the IRS, and they also have to be affiliated with a recognized religious denomination that has a established set of beliefs and traditions. On the part of the religious worker, they have to be coming to the U.S. to work at least part-time, the minimum of 20 hours a week, and they have to be working either as a minister or in a religious vocation or a religious occupation. In terms of a minister, it's usually someone that's authorized by the religious denomination to conduct certain religious practices. They're usually fully trained in the beliefs and practices of the denomination, and they get ordained. Examples of these would be a priest or a rabbi. In terms of a religious vocation, that's usually someone that has made a lifelong commitment to live a certain type of religious life or follow religious vows, such as a nun or a monk. And then a religious occupation is one that involves the knowledge and engagement of certain religious beliefs and practices. For example, religious instructors that teach theology, or Sunday school teachers of catechism, or also missionaries would count as a religious occupation. People that come to the U.S. to teach certain religious beliefs or establish a church or something like that. The key is that the job has to primarily apply the beliefs and practices of the religion. So, for example, someone that's coming to the U.S. to teach math at a church or religious school, even though that organization would be considered nonprofit tax-exempt religious organization, if the teacher is coming to teach math, then that wouldn't qualify as a religious occupation because they're teaching principles of math and not applying their religious beliefs. Also, any jobs that primarily involve administrative work or support positions would not qualify. And then the last requirement that has to be met by the religious worker is that they must have been a member of the religious denomination for at least 2 years before filing the petition. So those are the requirements. And then in terms of the process, first step would be to file a Form I-129 with USCIS, and you would include the R classification supplement to the form. The I-129 can be filed in the U.S. as a change of status for someone who's currently in the U.S. in another status, or you can request consular processing if the person is outside of the United States. In addition to the forms, you do need to include certain documentary evidence, some of which would be the IRS letter classifying the religious organization as nonprofit and tax exempt. Since the petition is a petition for employment, you do need to establish how the religious worker will be paid. It can be a salaried or non-salaried compensation. So if it's salaried, for example, you can provide pay stubs, W-2 salary letters of current or past employees that have been employed in that same or similar position. If it's non-salaried compensation, you can provide an explanation of how you're going to provide room and board and food and living expenses, and provide pictures of the living quarters, bedroom, kitchen area, etc. You need to provide some kind of proof that the religious worker has been a member of the religious denomination for 2 years immediately before the petition. So that's usually done through a letter from a church or religious organization that they're a part of that, certifies their membership for 2 years. You do need to provide proof of the religious worker's qualifications. So, for example, if the position is for a minister, Then you would provide their ordination certificates or degrees, transcripts, training certificates. Sometimes the positions don't require any formal ordination or education or something like that. So you could provide a description of the religious denomination's requirements for someone to become a member of that profession or position, and then a description of how the religious worker has completed those requirements and why they're qualified for that position. And then you would have to provide a support letter from the religious organization that has, a description of how all the requirements have been met, but also a detailed job description of the religious workers' day-to-day duties and responsibilities. And then if the religious denomination isn't one that's very highly recognized, then you would want to include articles, web printouts, some type of literature that describes the beliefs and practices of that denomination. Once the I-129 petition is approved by USCIS, then you would, if the person is outside of the U.S., you would file a DS-160 to do consular processing, and the individual would be interviewed to determine whether they qualify for the R1 visa, and you would bring all of those similar documents to the interview. Once approved, and once the religious worker is in the U.S., they're usually granted 30 months or 2.5 years, and it can be extended for another 30 months or 2.5 years. They are not allowed to be here on R1 visa for more than 5 years total. So if they've reached their 5 years, they can depart the U.S., be out of the U.S. for 1 year, and then reapply for another R1 visa. And then there is an R2 visa that's available for dependent spouses and children under 21 of R1 visa holders, but they are not able to apply for a work permit to work in the U.S. And then next, I'm going to briefly talk about the green card process for religious workers. There are very similar requirements and documentation that's going to be provided. The majority of the R1 visa requirements must be met. However, there are certain differences. The position for the green card must be a full-time position, so a minimum of 35 hours a week instead of part-time. And then the other is that the religious worker must have been employed either as a minister or in a religious vocation or religious occupation for 2 years immediately before the filing of the petition. So mere membership in the religious denomination is not enough. They have to already have been employed for 2 years. The first step in the green card process is to file the I-360 petition for a special immigrant worker. Similar documents will be submitted. The only additional documents are the proof of the religious worker's work experience for the 2 years preceding the petition. If they've been on R1 status, you can provide proof of their R1 status for the 2 years prior, pay stubs, W-2s, and then again, a support letter that describes their compensation, verifies their employment, describes their qualifications and job duties, etc. Once the I-360 petition is approved, the religious worker is subject to the visa bulletin under the EB4 category for religious workers. So they do have to wait for their priority date to become current before they're able to apply for the green card. They can file the I-485 application once their priority date becomes current if they're in the United States, or they can do consular processing abroad. And then similarly, they can include their dependent spouse and children under 21 in this process as well. So that's it. That's the R1 religious worker process in a nutshell.